You're crouched by a crackling fire, the cool night air of the 1800s Great Plains brushing your cheeks, as a clay pot simmers with a rich, earthy aroma that pulls you closer. Somewhere nearby, a Lakota family prepares a meal that's more than food. It's survival, tradition, woven into every bubbling spoonful. Welcome to the forgotten treasures of America's past, where Native American tribes turned simple ingredients into dishes that fueled their lives. Fair warning, you might not survive the hunger pangs this journey stirs up. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm curious where you're joining from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Let's start with soups, the heartbeat of many Native American meals in the 1800s. Picture yourself among the Lakota, stirring a pot of wasna broth, not the pemmican you're thinking of, but a soup version, thick with dried buffalo meat and wild turnips. The Lakota relied on buffalo for everything, from hides to food, and by the mid-1800s, their herds were dwindling due to European expansion, a harsh reality that made every meal sacred. You toss in wild turnips, their sharp bite softened by long simmering, and maybe some timsala, a starchy root that thickens the broth like nature's roux. The result? A steaming bowl that warms you against the prairie's chill, each sip grounding you in a world where every calorie counted. Now let's get quirky. Some Sioux recipes included choke cherries not just for flavor but because they believed these tart berries could ward off bad spirits. You'd crush them with a stone, their juice staining your fingers purple, and mix them into the soup for a tangy kick. Historians still argue whether choke cherries were purely culinary or held deeper ceremonial meaning. Some say they were offered to ancestors during feasts. Either way, you're slurping a broth that's half meal, half ritual, and it's hard not to feel connected to the land. You move to the Cherokee next, their Canuchi soup catching your eye. Imagine pounding hickory nuts into a creamy paste, mixing it with hominy, corn soaked in ash water to unlock its nutrients. This isn't just soup, it's a science lesson from the 1800s. The Cherokee used lye from wood ash to make corn more digestible, a process called nixtamalization, which mainstream history confirms was widespread across the Americas. You stir the pot, the nutty aroma curling up, and wonder how they perfected this without a chemistry degree. The soup's texture is velvety, almost decadent, and you're half convinced it could make a modern chef jealous. Joke's on them. Try finding hickory nuts at your local supermarket. Then there's the Iroquois white corn soup, a staple so revered it's still served at tribal gatherings today. You're hulling white corn, its kernels pale as moonlight, and simmering it with beans and a bit of venison if you're lucky. The Iroquois Confederacy, a powerhouse in the Northeast by the 1800s, used this soup to bring people together, much like your aunt's questionable casserole at Thanksgiving. The beans add protein, the corn adds comfort, and you're starting to see why this dish was a crowd pleaser. A quirky tidbit. Some Iroquois cooks added sassafras leaves for a subtle, root beer-like zing. Bet you didn't see that flavor profile coming. As you sip these soups, you notice their simplicity. Wild roots, nuts, corn, maybe a bit of meat. But that's the genius. Tribes like the Apache or Navajo didn't have spice racks or instant pots, yet they crafted meals that sustained entire communities. You're stirring a Navajo mutton stew now, the meat tough but flavorful, paired with wild onions foraged from the desert. The 1800s were a time of upheaval. Reservations were forming, and traditional lands were shrinking. But these soups were a quiet rebellion, a way to preserve culture in every bowl. You take another sip, and it's not just food, it's a story of resilience, whispered through steam and spice. You're kneeling in a sunlit clearing, the 1800s Southwest stretching endless around you. As you slice into a prickly pear cactus, its juice sticky on your fingers. The air hums with the scent of earth and sage, and you are about to uncover the vegetable dishes that were the backbone of Native American diets in this era. These weren't just sides. They were survival, coaxed from stubborn soils and wild landscapes. Remember that Lakota soup with wild turnips from last time? Now you're digging deeper into the plants that tribes like the Navajo, Cherokee, and Hopi turned into meals that could make a modern vegan weep with envy. Let's start with the Navajo and their love for yucca. You're peeling back its tough, fibrous leaves to reveal the starchy root, which you boil until it's soft and slightly sweet. By the 1800s, the Navajo were masters of dryland farming, cultivating crops in arid conditions where most would give up. Historical records show they used yucca not just for food but for soap and rope, making it the Swiss Army knife of desert plants. You mash the boiled root with a stone, maybe mix in some wild herbs, and it's a dish that's simple yet filling, like a hug from the desert itself. Bet your local diner doesn't serve yucca mash with that kind of backstory. Now shift to the Cherokee in the southeast where you're grating Jerusalem artichokes. Not an artichoke, but a sunflower root with a nutty crunch. You toss them with wild greens, maybe some ramps, which are like leeks with attitude. The Cherokee were farming pros by the 1800s, growing crops like these alongside their famous three sisters, corn, beans, and squash. This trio was a nutritional powerhouse, a fact mainstream history celebrates for its sustainable genius. You're munching on those artichokes, raw or lightly cooked, and they're crisp, earthy, maybe a little too adventurous for your cousin who only eats fries. A quirky tidbit? Some Cherokee cooks swore these roots could cure a stomachache, though historians still argue whether this was medicine or just wishful thinking. Over in the northeast, you're with the Iroquois, harvesting wild leeks. You chop them fine, their sharp scent stinging your eyes, and mix them with boiled beans for a dish that's half salad, half comfort food. The Iroquois used every part of the leek, bulb, stem, leaves, like a zero-waste chef before it was trendy. You're stirring this mix, the beans soft and the leeks adding a peppery kick. It's not gourmet, but it's honest, the kind of food that fueled longhouse gatherings. Here's a light joke. If you served this at a modern potluck, someone would definitely call it rustic chic and Instagram it. Then there's the Hopi, who took amaranth greens to another level. You're plucking these vibrant leaves, steaming them until they wilt into a tender pile. Amaranth wasn't just food. Its seeds were ground into flour, and some Hopi believed the plant held spiritual power, a fringe detail that adds a mystic vibe to your meal. You season with a pinch of saltbush, a salty herb that grows wild, and suddenly you're eating like a desert poet. Historians still debate whether amaranth's spiritual role trumped its culinary one. Did the Hopi eat it for strength or for ceremony? Either way, you're resavoring a dish that's as much about the land as it is about the plate. These vegetable dishes, from yucca to wild leeks, show how tribes turned what the earth gave them into sustenance. You're not just eating. You're tasting resilience, ingenuity, and a deep connection to the seasons. The 1800s were tough. Disease, displacement, and dwindling resources hit hard. But these plants were a lifeline. You bite into that Jerusalem artichoke, and it's like crunching through history itself, each flavor a testament to survival. No fancy sauces, no fusion menus, just you, the land, and a dish that's been feeding people for centuries. You're sitting cross-legged in a sun-warmed field, somewhere in the 1800s Southwest, a pile of vibrant squashes at your side, golden, green, striped, their skins tough as armor, but promising sweetness within. The air carries a faint whiff of sagebrush, and you're about to dive into the world of Native American squash dishes and salads, where tribes like the Zuni, Cherokee, and Iroquois transformed humble gourds and wild greens into meals that feel like a love letter to the earth. These dishes aren't just food, they're a craft, blending flavors that could make your microwave dinners blush. Remember that Navajo yucca mash from before? Now you're trading roots for squashes and leaves, tasting the sweet and wild side of tribal cuisine. Start with the Zuni and their roasted squash. You're slicing into a Hubbard squash, its flesh dense and orange, and roasting it over an open fire until it caramelizes into a buttery, sweet mess. The Zuni, farming in the arid Southwest during the 1800s, were squash whisperers, cultivating varieties that could withstand drought. Mainstream history notes that squash was a cornerstone of the Three Sisters system, corn, beans, and squash grown together in a symbiotic trio. You scoop out the roasted flesh, maybe mix in some piñon nuts for crunch, and it's a dish that's simple but soul-warming. Ever try roasting squash in your oven and call it homemade? The Zuni were doing it better. No preheat required. Now let's get quirky. Some Zuni cooks stuffed squash blossoms, those delicate yellow flowers, with a mix of cornmeal and wild herbs, then fried them lightly. You pop one in your mouth and it's like eating a crispy floral taco. Historians still argue whether these blossoms were a delicacy or just a clever way to use every part of the plant. Either way, you'll be munching on something so fleetingly seasonal it makes modern farm-to-table chefs look like they retrying too hard. The blossoms are gone in a bite, but the flavor lingers, light and grassy, like summer itself. Shift to the Cherokee, where you're tossing a salad of wild watercress and purslane. You're foraging along a creek, plucking peppery cress and succulent purslane leaves, their slight tang cutting through the humidity of a Georgia summer. The Cherokee were known for their diverse plant knowledge, using over 800 species for food and medicine by the 1800s, a fact that botanical historians love to geek out over. You mix these greens with crushed hickory nuts, maybe a drizzle of maple sap if you're feeling fancy. It's a salad that's fresh, crunchy, and makes you wonder why you ever bothered with iceberg lettuce. Here's a joke. If you served this at a modern barbecue, someone would ask for the organic vinaigrette recipe. In the Northeast, the Iroquois are serving up squash soup, a cousin to that white corn soup you slurped earlier. You're simmering chunks of pumpkin with beans and a handful of sunflower seeds, the broth thickening into something cozy enough to fend off an upstate New York frost. The Iroquois used every part of the squash, seeds roasted for snacks, flesh boiled or baked, even the rinds as bowls. A quirky tidbit? Some Iroquois cooks added sumac for a lemony zing, a trick that predates your grandma's lemon bars by centuries. You sip the soup and it's like drinking autumn warm and faintly sweet. Historians still debate whether sumac was a flavor choice or a medicinal boost. Either way, it's a game changer. These squash and salad dishes show how tribes took the land's gifts and made them sing. You're not just eating. You're tasting centuries of trial and error, of knowing exactly when to harvest a squash or pluck a leaf. The 1800s were a time of loss. Lands taken, traditions disrupted, but these dishes were a quiet defiance, a way to keep culture alive. You bite into a squash blossom, and it's like tasting resilience, each flavor a reminder that the earth always provides, even when the world feels heavy. You're crouched in a forest clearing, the 1800s air sharp with pine and the faint smoke of a fire, as you gather a bundle of wild greens and prepare to fry something crispy and golden. The world around you hums with life, birds chirping, leaves rustling, and you're about to explore the vibrant salads and fried treats that Native American tribes crafted to balance their diets and delight their palates. These dishes, from the tangy greens of the Southeast to the sizzling fry breads of the plains, were more than food. They were bursts of flavor in a life of hard-won survival. Remember those Cherokee watercress salads from before? Now you're diving into more greens and the satisfying crunch of fried creations. Let's start with the Seminole in Florida, where you're foraging saw palmetto shoots and coontie greens. You're tossing these into a salad, their slight bitterness softened by crushed persimmons which add a honeyed sweetness. The Seminole, navigating the swamps and hammocks of the 1800s, were experts at using every edible plant in their humid world. Historical records highlight their reliance on coontie, a starchy root turned into flour. But its greens were just as vital, eaten fresh or lightly steamed. You munch on this salad, the persimmons sticky on your fingers, and it's like a tropical breeze in a bowl. Ever try to make a salad this good without a grocery store? Good luck. Now for a quirky twist, some Seminole cooks added alligator pear, avocado to their greens. You're slicing into its creamy flesh, mixing it with wild mustard greens for a dish that's rich and peppery. Historians still argue whether avocados were a staple or a rare treat for the Seminole, given their spotty availability in the 1800s. Either way, you're eating a salad that's basically the great-grandparent of your trendy avocado toast, minus the overpriced coffee on the side. It's a light joke, but seriously, imagine explaining brunch to a Seminole elder. Shift to the plains where the Lakota are frying up Timpsila cakes. You're grating those wild turnips from that soup we talked about earlier, mixing them with cornmeal and maybe a bit of buffalo fat, then frying them in a hot skillet until they're golden and crisp. The Lakota were nomadic in the 1800s, following buffalo herds, and these portable cakes were perfect for travel. Mainstream history notes that frying became more common after European contact introduced metal pans, but the Lakota made it their own. You bite into one, the outside crunchy, the inside soft and earthy, and it's like a hug from the prairie. Bet your local food truck wishes it could nail this vibe. In the Southwest, the Apache are working their magic with mezcal leaves. You're wrapping agave hearts in damp leaves, roasting them underground for hours, then frying slivers into crispy strips. The result is sweet, smoky, and chewy, like nature's candy, with a side of crunch. A quirky tidbit? Some Apache believed eating mezcal could make you run faster. Probably not true, but you're tempted to sprint a lap just to test it. You're munching away, the flavor intense, and it's clear why this was a feast food. Historians still debate whether mezcal was a daily dish or saved for celebrations, but one bite makes you lean towards special occasion. These greens and fried treats show how tribes turned the wild into something extraordinary. You're not just eating a salad or a fritter. You're tasting ingenuity, the kind that took a handful of leaves or roots and made them unforgettable. The 1800s were a time of struggle, forced relocations, shrinking territories. But these dishes were a quiet rebellion, proof that joy could still be found in a well-made meal. You crunch into that timsila cake and it's like the land itself is whispering, "We're still here." You're standing on a misty northwest coast shore in the 1800s, waves lapping at your feet as you watch a Haida fisherman haul in a glistening salmon, its scales flashing like silver coins. The salty air mixes with the smoke from a nearby fire pit, and you're about to immerse yourself in the seafood and meat dishes that were the lifeblood of Native American tribes. From smoked fish that preserved the ocean's bounty, to robust meats that celebrated the hunt. These weren't just meals. They were triumphs over nature, flavors forged from rivers, forests, and plains. Remember those crispy Apache mezcal strips from before? Now you're trading greens for protein, savoring the smoky, hearty side of tribal traditions. Let's begin with the Chinook and their smoked salmon. You're layering fresh salmon fillets over alder wood racks, the smoke curling up like a lazy fog, infusing the fish with a woody, tangy essence that could last through harsh winters. The Chinook, masters of the Columbia River in the 1800s, relied on salmon runs that were so massive. Historical accounts describe rivers turning silver with fish, a mainstream fact that underscores their deep connection to seasonal cycles. You flake the smoked meat, its pink flesh tender and rich, maybe paired with wild berries for a sweet contrast. It's the kind of dish that makes you rethink your canned tuna habit. This is salmon with soul. Now for a quirky detail, some Chinook cooks used devil's club bark in their smoking process, believing it added a protective spirit to the food. You're sprinkling shavings of this spiny plant into the fire, the aroma sharp and medicinal. Historians still argue whether devil's club was purely for flavor or tied to shamanistic rituals. Did it ward off illness or just bad tastes? Either way, you're biting into salmon that's layered with mystery, each mouthful a nod to ancient wisdom. Jokes on modern smokers. They've got fancy gadgets, but nothing beats a riverbank fire and a dash of folklore. Shift to the plains, where the Sioux are preparing buffalo jerky. You're slicing lean meat from a fresh hunt, rubbing it with salt and wild sage, then drying it in the sun until it's tough as leather, but bursting with flavor. The Sioux economy revolved around the buffalo in the 1800s, providing not just food but tools and shelter, a fact etched into every treaty and trail. You chew on a strip, the sage adding an herby kick and its portable power, perfect for long rides across the grasslands. Imagine packing this for your next road trip instead of gas station snacks. Your car might smell better too. In the southeast, the Creek are roasting venison. You're marinating deer haunch in a pit with hickory coals, the meat slow cooking until it falls off the bone, juicy and smoky. The Creek hunted with bows and traps, adapting to forested lands where deer were plentiful. A quirky tidbit. Some Creek hunters whispered thanks to the deer spirit before the kill and cooked the heart first as an offering. You're savoring that tender roast, perhaps with a side of those wild greens we foraged earlier, and it's a meal that honors the cycle of life. Historians debate if these rituals were widespread or varied by clan, but one taste makes you appreciate the reverence. Out on the Great Lakes, the Ojibwe are boiling sturgeon stew. You're chunking the massive fish into a pot with wild rice and leeks, the broth simmering into something hearty and fishy sweet. The Ojibwe harvested sturgeon with spears and nets, a practice that sustained them through long winters, as noted in fur trade journals from the era. You ladle out a bowl, the rice adding nutty texture, and it's comfort food with a watery twist. Light sarcasm here. If you think your grandma's stew is legendary, Wait till you try one that's been perfected over centuries without a pressure cooker. These seafood and meat preparations highlight the diversity of tribal hunting and fishing. From ocean to prairie, tribes like the Haida or Blackfoot turned animals into sustenance with skill and respect. The 1800s brought challenges. Overhunting by settlers depleted herds. But these dishes preserved more than food. They kept stories alive. You tear into that venison, and it's like tasting the wild heart of America. Each bite a reminder of traditions that endure. Moving to the southwest, the Pueblo are drying mutton. You're hanging strips of sheep meat, introduced via Spanish contact but adopted swiftly. In the dry air, seasoning with chiles for a spicy edge. The Pueblo integrated sheep into their cuisine by the mid-1800s, blending old and new worlds. You nibble on the jerky, the heat building slowly, and it's a fusion before fusion was cool. A joke. Modern jerky brands charge premium for exotic flavors, but the Pueblo had this dialed in without the marketing hype. In the Arctic fringes, though more 1800s focus on continental tribes, influences from Inuit-like methods seeped south, like smoked seal, but let's stick to salmon variations. You're with the Tlingit, fermenting salmon heads in pits for a pungent delicacy. Quirky? It's like nature's cheese aged underground. Historians argue over fermentation's origins. Was it preservation or flavor innovation? You try a bit, and it's an acquired taste, bold and funky. Wrapping up these savory bites, you see how meats and seafood weren't luxuries but necessities. Crafted with what the land and waters provided, tribes adapted, innovated, and celebrated through food, turning hunts into feasts that bonded communities. You finish that sturgeon stew, warmth spreading, and feel the pull of history in every flavor. You're crouched beside a glowing fire in the 1800s Southwest, the scent of roasting meat mingling with the dusty aroma of desert air, as you watch a Zuni cook turn a spit loaded with venison over crackling mesquite. The stars overhead feel close enough to touch, and you are about to sink your teeth into the hearty roasts and breads that defined Native American feasts. From the charred game of the plains to the dense earthy loaves of the eastern woodlands. These dishes were the centerpieces of tribal gatherings, binding communities with every smoky bite and chewy crust. Remember that Chinook smoked salmon from before? Now you're trading seafood for land-based feasts, exploring how tribes like the Blackfoot and Cherokee made meat and bread into art. Start with the Blackfoot on the Great Plains, where you're savoring a buffalo roast. You're rubbing the meat with wild sage and chokecherry paste, then slow roasting it in a pit lined with hot stones until it's tender and infused with smoky sweetness. The Blackfoot were buffalo-dependent in the 1800s, their entire culture revolving around the herds, as documented in explorer journals from the era, a mainstream historical fact that paints their nomadic life vividly. You slice into the roast, the juices dripping, and pair it with a handful of dried berries. It's a meal that screams survival, yet tastes like a celebration. Ever tried to cook a whole buffalo in your backyard? Yeah, didn't think so. Now, for a quirky twist, some Blackfoot cooks wrapped their roasts in beargrass leaves before cooking, believing it added a subtle, grassy flavor and kept evil spirits at bay. You're peeling back the charred leaves, the meat steaming, and wondering if the spirits are impressed. Historians still argue whether beargrass was purely practical or carried sacred meaning. Did it just keep the meat moist? Or was it a ritual offering? Either way, you're eating a roast that's as much ceremony as supper, and it's hard not to feel the weight of tradition in every bite. Shift to the southeast, where the Cherokee are baking selu-asuyi, a corn-based bread. You're grinding corn into a coarse meal, mixing it with water and a touch of wood ash for that nixtamalization trick we mentioned earlier, then shaping it into flat rounds and baking them on hot stones. The Cherokee's corn cultivation was so advanced by the 1800s that they supplied early settlers, a fact woven into colonial records. You break off a piece. Its crust crisp and the inside soft, almost nutty. It's the kind of bread that makes your store-bought loaf look like a sad imposter. Here's a light joke. If you served this at a modern brunch, someone would call it artisan and charge $12 a slice. In the Southwest, the Hopi are roasting prickly pear alongside their meat. You're skewering chunks of rabbit with cactus pads, grilling them until the meat is smoky and the cactus softens into a tangy side. The Hopi mastered desert cuisine, using every edible plant and animal, and their rabbit roasts were a staple at communal feasts. A quirky tidbit: some Hopi cooks buried their roasts underground with hot coals, a method that tenderized tougher cuts like magic. You're digging into the rabbit, the cactus adding a zesty kick, and it's like a barbecue from another era. Historians debate whether underground cooking was about flavor or just practicality in a wood-scarce desert. Either way, it's genius. Back east, the Iroquois are serving corn pone, a dense bread baked in clay pots. You're mixing cornmeal with beans and wild leeks, then baking it until it's golden and sturdy enough to travel. The Iroquois used corn pone as a trail food, perfect for long hunts or council meetings. You bite into it, the texture hearty and the leeks adding a faint oniony zip. Imagine packing this for your next hike instead of a protein bar. Way less packaging, way more soul. A second joke. If you dropped this bread on your foot, you'd need a medicine man, not a doctor. These roasts and breads were more than sustenance. They were stories told through fire and flour. In the 1800s, tribes faced land loss and forced migrations, yet they gathered around these meals to share strength. You tear into that Cherokee cornbread, and it's like tasting resilience. Each crumb a reminder of fields tended and hunts honored. The Blackfoot's buffalo, the Hopi's rabbit, the Iroquois' pone, all speak to a deep knowledge of the land, a wisdom that turned raw ingredients into feasts that fed both body and spirit. You're huddled in a warm adobe dwelling in the 1800s Southwest, the scent of cornmeal and steam filling the air, as you watch a Navajo elder knead dough with practiced hands, shaping it into something that promises comfort and crunch. The fire crackles softly, casting flickering shadows, and you're about to explore the world of Native American breads and tamales, those wrapped wonders and fried delights that have been passed down like cherished family secrets. From the fluffy fry breads of the plains to the steamed corn husks of the Southeast, these dishes were the glue of meals, versatile and vital. Remember that Cherokee corn pone from before? Now you're wrapping up with more breads and the art of tamales, tasting traditions that still echo today. Let's start with the Navajo fry bread, a staple that's as much history as it is food. You're heating lard in a cast-iron skillet, dropping in flattened dough made from flour, salt, and water, simple ingredients introduced during the long walk era of the 1860s, when government rations replaced traditional foods. Mainstream history records this as a resilient adaptation, turning hardship into a beloved dish that's now a symbol at powwows. You watch it puff up golden and crispy, then tear into it hot, maybe drizzled with honey for sweetness. It's like a warm blanket for your taste buds, but don't blame me if you start craving a food truck version midway through. Now, for a quirky tidbit, some Navajo cooks added blue cornmeal to their fry bread, giving it a striking purple hue and a nuttier flavor, believed to connect eaters to the sky spirits. You're flipping this colorful bread, the blue tones mesmerizing, and wondering if it's the original Instagram-worthy food. Historians still argue whether blue corn was a ceremonial choice or just a flavorful twist. Did it honor the heavens, or was it simply what grew best in arid soils? Either way, you're munching on something that's visually stunning and deeply rooted, a far cry from your average white bread. Shift to the southeast, where the Choctaw are steaming tamales in corn husks. You're mixing cornmeal with lard and spices, stuffing it with venison or beans, then wrapping it tightly in soaked husks before steaming over a low fire. The Choctaw adopted tamales from Mesoamerican influences via trade routes, blending them into their cuisine by the 1800s, a fact noted in ethnographic studies. You unwrap one, the steam escaping like a sigh, revealing a moist, savory bundle that melts in your mouth. It is the kind of portable feast perfect for a day on the trail. Joke S on modern meal preppers. These were the original grab-and-go. In the Northeast, the Seneca are baking Johnny cakes, a flatbread from cornmeal griddled until crisp. You're stirring the batter with water and a pinch of salt, cooking it on a hot stone for that authentic char. The Seneca, part of the Iroquois, used Johnny cakes as a quick energy source during hunts, their simplicity allowing for endless variations. You bite into one, the edges crunchy and the center soft, perhaps topped with maple syrup for a sweet kick. Imagine explaining this to a French baker. No yeast, no problem. That's your second light joke, highlighting the ingenuity. Out west, the Pueblo are crafting piqui bread, thin as paper and layered like crepes. You're spreading blue or white corn batter on a hot stone with your palm, cooking it in seconds to a delicate crispness. A quirky detail? Piqui was often made by women in a ritualistic process, stacked in colorful layers for ceremonies, almost like edible art. You're peeling off a sheet, its texture light and airy, and it crumbles satisfyingly. Historians debate if piqui's thinness was for portability or symbolism, representing the fragility of life, or just easy to pack. These breads and tamales were everyday miracles, turning basic grains into something extraordinary. In the 1800s, as tribes navigated reservations and cultural shifts, these recipes preserved identity, shared at gatherings where stories flowed as freely as the food. You savor that Choctaw tamale, the husk peeling away to reveal history wrapped inside. Each bite a testament to adaptation and endurance. The Navajo fry bread, the Seneca Johnny cake, they all speak of hands that kneaded not just dough but the fabric of survival. Venturing further, the Apache are frying acorn bread, grinding bitter acorns into flour after leaching out tannins in streams. You're patting the dough into rounds, frying them until golden, the nutty flavor emerging like a hidden treasure. The Apache foraged acorns widely, a practice that sustained them through lean times. You taste it, earthy and robust, maybe mixed with wild seeds for extra crunch. Third joke. If you think gluten-free is a trend, the Apache were way ahead, minus the hashtags. Wrapping these up, you see how breads and tamales bridged meals, from sweet to savory, simple to elaborate. They were the unsung heroes of native cuisine, versatile enough to accompany roasts or stand alone. As you finish that piqui sheet, crumbling in your fingers, you feel the generations behind it, hands passing down techniques that turned scarcity into abundance.